Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now we begin. Have you ever heard whispers when you're alone in the subway? The kind that disappear when you turn your head, but linger in your memory like a half-forgotten dream. I never believed in ghosts until I started working the night shift at Pershing Station. It was one of those old metro stops, built in the 70s and barely renovated since. The kind with yellowed fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered, casting strange shadows across cracked tile floors. The station was scheduled for demolition in a month, another victim of the city's modernization plan, but until then, someone had to watch over it during the midnight hours when no trains ran. That someone was me, Dmitry Koval, 32 years old, and desperately needing the extra income from this security job. My apartment rent had increased again, and my day job at the bookstore barely covered essentials. When the Metro Authority posted the night watchman position, I jumped at the opportunity despite the warnings from the hiring manager about the creepy atmosphere at Pershing. It's just an old building settling, I told myself as I walked down the empty platform on my first night. My footsteps echoed off the curved ceiling, creating a rhythm that seemed to follow me like an invisible companion. The control booth was a small glass box at the far end of the platform, equipped with monitors showing grainy security camera feeds, a desk lamp, and an ancient rotary phone for emergencies. The station felt different at night. During the day, it was filled with the constant motion of passengers, students with backpacks, business people clutching coffee cups, tourists consulting maps. But after midnight, when the last train had departed, Pershing transformed into something else entirely. The cavernous space seemed to breathe. I settled into the booth, unpacked my thermos of coffee and sandwich, and began my first entry in the night log. October 12, 0015, all clear, station secure. Simple, professional. Just the fact. 3 hours passed uneventfully. I checked the maintenance tunnels twice, as required by protocol, finding nothing but cockroaches and decades of accumulated dust. I read half a novel, completed a crossword puzzle, and was considering a quick nap when I first heard it. A soft scraping sound, like shoe leather against concrete, coming from the north end of the platform. I looked up from my book. The station was empty. I had just checked the monitors. Yet there it was again, scrape, pause, scrape. Like someone dragging their foot slightly as they walked. Hello, my voice sounded small in the vast space. Security. Is someone there? The scraping stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the booth. The platform stretched before me, illuminated by those sickly yellow lights. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Must have been the ventilation system, I muttered, trying to reassure myself. But the air was still that night, with not even a whisper of a breeze through the tunnels. As I turned to go back to the booth, I noticed something odd about one of the benches. A dark smudge marred its otherwise pristine surface, a handprint still glistening wet. I approached slowly, my heart beginning to pound in my chest. It wasn't water. The liquid was too dark, too viscous. I raised my flashlight to examine it more closely, and that's when I felt it, a sudden drop in temperature so severe that my breath condensed in front of my face. In October, in an underground station with no air conditioning. And then from directly behind me came a whisper so close that I could feel the breath on my ear. The last train hasn't left yet. I spun around, flashlight raised like a weapon, heart hammering against my ribs, but there was no one there. Just the empty platform and the dark mouth of the tunnel, seeming to stretch deeper into the earth than it had before. The radio in my pocket crackled to life, making me jump. Through a burst of static, I heard what sounded like announcements, the kind that echo through stations during the day. But the words were distorted, playing backwards or in some language I couldn't comprehend. I backed away, moving toward the booth, unable to take my eyes off that dark tunnel entrance. Something was happening to the shadows there, as though they were thickening, coalescing into shapes almost, but not quite human. My back hit the glass wall of the security booth, and I fumbled for the door handle without looking. My rational mind was screaming that this was impossible, that I was overtired, that my imagination was playing tricks. But my instincts, ancient, animal instincts, were screaming something else entirely. Run. Hide. Something is coming. The shadows in the tunnel mouth seemed to pulse now, expanding outward onto the platform. And from within them came a sound that froze the blood in my veins, the distinctive clatter of an approaching train, growing louder by the second. But there were no trains at this hour. The system had shut down hours ago. And yet I could feel the vibration in the tiles beneath my feet, could hear the squeal of metal wheels on tracks. The station's old speakers crackled to life, and through waves of static came an announcement in a voice that sounded like it was speaking through water, arriving now. The midnight service to Final destination. The lights in the station flickered once, twice, and then plunged me into darkness. In the darkness, time seemed to stretch like taffy. 1 second. 2, 5. The emergency lights should have activated by now. When they finally flickered on, casting a dim red glow across the platform, I remained frozen against the booth door. The rumbling had stopped. The shadows had retreated. But something had changed about the station, a subtle shift in atmosphere that made my skin prickle. The digital clock on the wall read 3:15, but my watch said it was barely 1:30. Had I experienced some kind of blackout? A waking dream. I'd heard of night guards hallucinating on long, lonely shifts. Pull yourself together, I whispered, my voice unnaturally loud in the silence. I needed to check the circuit breakers in the maintenance room. Standard procedure for a power failure. My legs felt like lead as I forced myself to move away from the booth. Each step echoed across the empty platform, the sound doubling back on itself as if someone were walking a few paces behind me. I didn't look back. Couldn't look back. The maintenance room was located behind an unmarked door at the end of the platform. As I approached, I noticed something odd, a thin line of water seeping out from beneath it, spreading across the concrete floor in tiny rivulets. Water damage wasn't uncommon in these old stations, but this. I pushed the door open. The maintenance room was a cramped space filled with electrical panels, cleaning supplies, and ancient tools hanging on the walls. The emergency light cast everything in a bloody glow. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, forming a small puddle on the floor. Great, I muttered, a burst pipe on top of everything else. But as I moved toward the circuit breaker panel, my flashlight beam revealed something unusual about the water. It wasn't coming from above. It was seeping upward through a small drain in the floor, a drain that should have been taking water away, not bringing it in. I crouched down, watching in disbelief as the water continued to rise against gravity, bubbling up from the darkness below. And there was something else wrong with it. The liquid was too thick, too dark, like the handprint on the bench. My heart began to race again. I stood quickly, backing away from the spreading puddle, and bumped into the shelves behind me. Something fell, clattering loudly on the concrete floor, an old maintenance logbook, its yellowed pages splaying open. I don't know what compelled me to pick it up. Perhaps some desperate need to focus on anything other than the impossible water rising from the drain. The book was dated 1978, the year the station opened. I flipped through it, pages crackling with age, until an entry caught my eye. October 12, 1978, accident in North Tunnel. Train 17 derailed. Casualties unknown. Station closed for investigation. Today was October 12th. I stared at the page, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Below the entry was a list of names, presumably the passengers on that train. Dozens of them filling the page with cramped handwriting. And at the very bottom, circled in faded red ink, not all bodies recovered. A cold drop of water hit the back of my neck, making me flinch. I looked up. The ceiling was now covered in a web of dark, wet stains that pulsed and expanded as I watched. The water wasn't coming from a burst pipe. It was coming from everywhere. I dropped the logbook and lunged for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The metal handle was ice cold against my palm, and no amount of pulling would make it turn. I was trapped. "Help!" I shouted, pounding on the door. Someone help me, but who would hear me? The station was empty. The next shift wouldn't arrive until morning. Behind me, the drain gurgled loudly. I turned to see the dark water had covered half the floor and was rising quickly, bringing with it a nauseating smell of rust and decay. And there was something else in the water now, something solid bumping against my shoes. I pointed my flashlight down. A single shoe floated in the rising liquid. A woman's shoe, vintage style from the 70s. As I watched, paralyzed with horror, more objects began to emerge from the drain: a man's hat, a broken pair of glasses, a child's backpack, all rising to the surface like terrible buoys marking the locations of those below. The water was at my knees now, shockingly cold, soaking through my uniform pants. I redoubled my efforts on the door, throwing my shoulder against it until pain shot through my arm. "Please," I gasped, no longer shouting but pleading, "please open." As if in response to my desperation, the lights flickered again, and in that moment of complete darkness, I felt something brush against my submerged leg, something solid and cold that wrapped around my ankle like fingers. I screamed, kicking frantically to free myself. The emergency lights came back on, revealing the water had receded. The floor was completely dry. The drain was just a drain again. The door behind me stood slightly ajar, offering escape. I stumbled out onto the platform, gasping for breath, my uniform completely dry despite what I'd just experienced. Had I imagined it all? Was I losing my mind? A soft tone echoed through the station, the sound that normally precedes an announcement. I looked up at the old speakers, expecting to hear a test message or system notification. Instead, a child's voice came through, distorted by static but clearly audible. "Can someone help me find my mom?" "I can't find my mom." The voice echoed across the empty platform, repeating the same phrase over and over, growing more desperate with each iteration. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voice seemed to be inside my head now. "I can't find my mom. I can't find my mom. I can't find him, why mom?" And then silence. Complete and sudden, as if someone had cut the power to the entire sound system. In that silence, I became aware of something moving at the far end of the platform. A small figure silhouetted against the dim emergency lights. A child standing motionless, facing the wall. Every instinct told me to run in the opposite direction, to flee up the stairs and out into the night. But I was a security guard. It was my job to ensure no one was in the station after hours, especially not a child. "Hey," I called, my voice breaking. "Well, you can't be here. The station's closed." The figure didn't move. I took a step forward, then another. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" Still no response. I was halfway down the platform now, close enough to see that it was indeed a child, a small boy in what looked like old-fashioned clothes. His back remained turned to me. "Hey, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Let's get you upstairs and call your parents." I reached out to touch his shoulder. As my fingers made contact, the boy turned, but what faced me wasn't a child at all. Where a face should have been was only a swirling darkness, like a miniature black hole that seemed to pull at me, to want to draw me in. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. The child thing took a step toward me, and another. Where its feet touched the platform, the concrete darkened as if with that same mysterious liquid. My back hit one of the support pillars. The thing was only a few feet away now, reaching out with small hands that elongated as I watched, fingers stretching like taffy into impossible lengths. "The train is coming," it said in that same child's voice from the announcement. "Don't you hear it? The train is coming for all of us." And in the tunnel beyond, I heard it, the distinctive rumble of an approaching train. The rumbling grew louder, vibrations traveling through the concrete and up into my bones. Wind gusted from the tunnel mouth, carrying with it the scent of metal and something else, something sickly sweet and putrid. The child thing was gone, vanished between one blink and the next. But I wasn't alone on the platform anymore. Dark shapes were beginning to form all around me, hazy at first, like heat mirages, then solidifying into human silhouettes. Dozens of them standing silently, all facing the tunnel as if waiting for the train. My mind screamed that this was impossible. The station was closed. The trains had stopped running hours ago. There was no one here but me. Yet I could see them, men in old-fashioned suits, women with vintage hairstyles, children clutching toys that hadn't been manufactured in decades. All of them translucent, their edges blurring like watercolor paintings left in the rain. All of them silent, expectant, waiting. I needed to get out. No. I turned toward the stairs that led to the street level, but they weren't there anymore. Where the exit should have been was only a solid wall, covered in the same grimy tiles as the rest of the station. "This isn't real," I whispered, pressing my palms against my eyes. "Wake up, Dmitri. Wake up," but when I opened my eyes, the phantom passengers were still there. And the rumbling from the tunnel had become a roar. Light spilled from the darkness, the powerful beam of a train's headlight. But something was wrong with the light. It wasn't the clean white of modern headlamps, but a sickly yellow glow that seemed to bend around objects rather than illuminate them. The station's ancient PA system crackled to life again, now arriving on Platform 1, Train 17 to final destination. Please stand back from the platform edge, Train 17. The one from the maintenance log. The one that had derailed in 1978. The spectral passengers began to move forward as one, crowding toward the edge of the platform. I was caught in their midst, pushed and jostled by bodies that felt both solid and insubstantial at the same time, like pressing against dense fog. "Stop," I gasped, struggling against the current of bodies. "That's not a real train." "You're not real," a woman turned to look at me, an elderly lady with a pearl necklace and vacant, milky eyes. "We're as real as you are, young man," she said, her voice echoing as if coming from the bottom of a well. "We've just been waiting longer for our train." The roaring was deafening now. The phantom train burst from the tunnel, an ancient model that hadn't run on these tracks in over 40 years. Its metal exterior was dented and blackened, windows shattered. And inside, pressed against what remained of the glass, were more faces, hundreds of them, contorted in silent screams. The train screeched to a halt, the doors sliding open with a hiss of escaping air. The smell that poured out was overwhelming, decay and smoke and something else, something that made my eyes water and my stomach heave. The crowd surged forward, boarding the train with mechanical precision. None of them seemed to notice or care about the horrific state of the carriage, about the darkness that swirled inside it like living smoke. I fought against the tide, pushing my way back from the platform edge. "Don't get on," I shouted. "It's not safe." A young man in a conductor's uniform appeared beside me, his face pale and drawn, a dark stain spreading across his chest. "Everyone must board," he said tonelessly. "No one can stay behind this time." His hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Including you, Dmitri Koval." Ice flooded my veins. "How do you know my name?" The conductor's lips stretched into a grimace that might have been a smile. "We know all the night guards. You're not the first to see us. But you might be the last." He began pulling me toward the open train door, his fingers digging into my flesh with impossible strength. Inside the carriage, the other passengers had taken their seats, but they were challenging. Their bodies were melting, flesh running like wax to reveal glimpses of bone and worse beneath. "No," I planted my feet, summoning strength born of pure terror. "I don't belong here, neither did we," the conductor hissed, his face beginning to sag, features sliding downward like a melting candle. "Neither did we." With a desperate wrench, I tore free of his grip and stumbled backward, falling hard onto the platform. The conductor stood over me, reaching down with hands that were elongating, fingers stretching into talons. "You can't escape," he said, voice gargling as his mouth lost definition. "No one escapes the midnight train." I scrambled backward, crab walking away from those terrible hands. My back hit something solid, a maintenance door I hadn't noticed before, set into the wall behind a support pillar. Without thinking, I grabbed the handle and turned. To my surprise, it opened. I threw myself through the doorway and slammed it shut behind me. I found myself in a narrow maintenance tunnel, lit by widely spaced emergency bulbs that cast more shadows than light. The concrete walls were damp and covered in graffiti and decades of grime. But it was real, solid, a part of the actual station I recognized from my training tour. I leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. Through the door, I could hear the ghostly train's engine idling, the conductor's voice making unintelligible announcements. Then a new sound, fingernails scratching at the door, softly at first, then with increasing frenzy. The handle began to turn. I ran. The maintenance tunnel twisted and branched, a labyrinth of service corridors that ran behind and beneath the public areas of the station. I had been shown the main routes during my orientation, but had never ventured into the deeper recesses of this underground network. Behind me, I heard the door crash open, followed by the sound of many feet, too many feet, pursuing me. I didn't look back. Couldn't look back. I turned left, then right, then left again, moving deeper into the bowels of the station. The emergency lights became fewer, the darkness between them stretching longer. My flashlight beam bounced wildly off the walls as I ran, creating lurching shadows that seemed to reach for me with elongated fingers. The tunnel began to slope downward. The air grew colder, damper. Water dripped from overhead pipes, splashing onto my face like icy tears. The walls were different here, older brickwork rather than concrete, blackened with age and what looked unsettlingly like scorch marks. I slowed, breath coming in ragged gasps. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but I didn't trust the silence. This deep under the station, I could still feel vibrations through the floor. The phantom train was still there, waiting. My flashlight beam caught something ahead, a dead end. But no, not quite a dead end. Set into the brick wall was an ancient wooden door, its surface carved with symbols I didn't recognize. It looked completely out of place in the utilitarian tunnel, like something from another time, another world. As I approached, I noticed the carving seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles, sometimes appearing as letters in an alphabet I couldn't identify, sometimes resolving into faces frozen in expressions of agony. I shouldn't open it. Every instinct, every horror movie I'd ever seen told me not to open that door. But behind me, the sounds of pursuit were growing louder again, the shuffle of too many feet, the whispered conversations of passengers who had died decades ago. I reached for the handle, an ornate brass affair, green with verdigris. It turned with surprising ease, the door swinging inward on silent hinges. Beyond was darkness, absolute, complete darkness that my flashlight couldn't penetrate. It was as if the beam simply stopped at the threshold, unable to illuminate whatever lay beyond. The shuffling behind me grew louder. A voice called my name, the conductor, his words distorted as if speaking underwater. I had no choice. I stepped through the doorway into the darkness beyond, pulling the door closed behind me. The last thing I heard was the conductor's voice, suddenly clear and terribly close. Wrong choice, Dimitri. You've just boarded a different train. The door clicked shut, and I was alone in the dark. Absolute darkness. Not the dim shadows of night, but a complete absence of light that made my eyes ache as they strained uselessly to see. My flashlight was dead, though I couldn't remember it failing. The darkness felt almost alive, pressing against my skin like a physical presence. I stood perfectly still, afraid to move, to breathe. The silence was as absolute as the darkness, no dripping water, no distant rumble of trains, not even the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Had I gone deaf as well as blind? I snapped my fingers next to my ear. The sound was muffled, as if I were hearing it through layers of cotton. Hello, my voice didn't echo. It didn't travel at all, dying inches from my lips. I reached back for the door I'd come through, but my hands found only empty air. The door was gone. I was trapped in this lightless void. Panic rose in my throat, threatening to choke me. I forced myself to breathe slowly, counting each inhalation. 1, 2, 3. On the count of 4, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, coming from somewhere in the darkness ahead of me. Dab, 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 like fingernails on glass, or bone on stone. I should have been terrified. But after the absolute sensory deprivation, any stimulus was welcome. I moved toward the sound, arms outstretched before me, shuffling my feet to avoid unseen obstacles. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Dab dab dab, dab dab dab. A pattern now, not random. 3 quick taps, pause, repeat. Like Morse code. My foot struck something solid, a step. I knelt, feeling with my hands. A staircase lighting downward. The tapping was coming from below. How could there be anything below a subway station? We were already deep underground. Yet here was a staircase descending into somewhere even deeper. The tapping continued, urging me onward. I began to descend, counting the steps as I went. 10, 20, 30. The air grew colder, heavier with moisture. The smell of wet stone and something else, something metallic and organic at the same time. At 50 steps, my foot came down on level ground. The tapping stopped. In its place came a soft hum, like fluorescent lights powering up. Dim illumination bloomed around me, revealing a space so vast that the light couldn't reach its boundaries. I stood on a platform much like the one above, but impossibly older, built of crumbling stone rather than concrete. The ceiling arched high overhead, supported by columns carved to resemble human figures, their faces contorted in expressions of agony. And stretching out before me were tracks, not modern metal rails, but deep channels cut into the stone floor, disappearing into tunnels that were perfect circles of darkness. This was a station, but not one built by any transit authority I knew of. This place was ancient, predating the city above by centuries, perhaps millennia. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice came from behind me. I spun around to face an elderly man sitting on a stone bench. He wore the uniform of a station attendant, but of a style I'd never seen before, high-collared, with brass buttons and insignia that resembled no transit system logo I recognized. His face was kind, grandfatherly, with deep wrinkles and alert eyes. He looked normal, the most normal thing I'd seen since this nightmare began. What is this place? My voice sounded small in the vast chamber. The old man smiled. The first station, the original. All others are merely echoes. He patted the bench beside him. After a moment's hesitation, I sat down, keeping a cautious distance. I don't understand, I said. There was an accident upstairs. Train 17. In 1978, there are always accidents, the old man replied, his smile never wavering. Time is a circle like the tunnels. What happens once happens always, playing out again and again. He turned to look at me fully, and I noticed something wrong with his eyes. The pupils were elongated, vertical like a cat's or a reptile's. You're not a normal night guard, are you, Dmitri Koval? You've seen things in the dark before. Things others would deny or rationalize away. I swallowed hard. He was right. All my life I'd glimpsed things at the corner of my vision, heard whispers in empty rooms. I'd taught myself to ignore them, to pretend they weren't real. How do you know that about me? The old man laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. The station knows all who enter it, especially those who can see beyond the veil. He gestured toward the dark tunnels. They're looking for conductors, you know. Those who can guide souls between stations. It's a prestigious position. A chill ran down my spine. I don't want to be a conductor. I want to go home, home. The old man's expression turned pitying. So, my boy, don't you understand yet? You are home. You've always been here. A distant rumbling began to build, coming from one of the tunnel mouths. The old man stood, straightening his uniform. Right on time, he said, looking at a pocket watch I hadn't noticed before. The midnight train is never late. The rumbling grew louder, and with it came a light, not the yellow beam of the phantom train above, but a cold blue radiance that made the stone walls glisten as if covered in ice. I need to go, I said, standing abruptly. This isn't right. I don't belong here. The old man's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. Everyone belongs here, eventually. The only question is when you board. His face was changing, aging decades in seconds, skin tightening against bone until he resembled a mummified corpse more than a living man. But his eyes remained the same, those vertical pupils, watching me with ancient hunger. Let me go, I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. The train is coming, Dmitri, he said, his voice now a dry whisper. Your seat is reserved. It has been for a very long time. The blue light was flooding the platform now, so bright it hurt to look at. The rumbling had become a physical force, shaking loose dust and small stones from the ceiling high above. With a desperate wrench, I tore free of the old man's grip, taking part of him with me. His hand came away at the wrist, still clutching my arm, dry skin cracking to reveal not blood and bone, but darkness, the same swirling void I'd seen in the child thing's face. I flung the severed hand away, watching in horror as it skittered across the platform like a pale spider before dissolving into shadow. The old man, or what was left of him, didn't seem concerned by the loss of his hand. He smiled that terrible smile again, head tilting at an impossible angle. Run if you must, he said. There are many tunnels, but they all lead back here. No one escapes the midnight service. I backed away, then turned and fled into the nearest tunnel, not the one from which the light and rumbling were emanating, but a smaller passage half hidden behind one of the tortured columns. The passage was narrow, forcing me to turn sideways in places, rough stone scraping against my back and chest. There was just enough of that strange ambient light to see a few feet ahead, revealing a tunnel that twisted and turned like an animal burrow. Behind me, I heard the phantom train arrive, its brakes screaming like a living thing in pain. Voices echoed from the platform, hundreds of voices, all speaking at once in languages I couldn't identify. I pushed forward, ignoring the pain as sharp edges of stone tore at my uniform and skin. The tunnel began to slope upward, giving me hope. Up was good. Up might lead back to the normal world, to streetlights and traffic, and people who weren't melting into shadows. The air grew warmer, the stone beneath my hands less damp. The tunnel widened enough for me to walk normally again. And ahead I saw light, normal, yellowish electric light spilling from what looked like an open doorway. I staggered toward it, exhaustion suddenly hitting me like a physical blow. How long had I been down here? Hours, days. My watch had stopped at 1:34, the exact time I'd first heard that scraping sound on the platform. The doorway resolved into a maintenance entry, the same door I'd fled through to escape the conductor and his phantom passengers. Beyond it, I could see the regular platform of Pershing Station, looking mundane and blessedly normal. I stepped through, half expecting the door to vanish behind me. But it remained solid, an ordinary maintenance entrance with a sign reading, "Authorized personnel only." The station was empty. The emergency lights were off, the regular fluorescents buzzing overhead. My security booth sat at the far end of the platform, its monitors glowing with normal camera feeds. I checked my watch again. Still frozen at 1:34. But the station clock read 5:45. 15 minutes until the morning shift arrived. 15 minutes until I could leave this place. I walked slowly toward the booth, muscles aching, mind reeling from everything I'd experienced. Was it over? Had it all been some kind of hallucination, brought on by stress and isolation? As I passed a bench, the same one where I'd seen that glistening handprint, I noticed something lying on the seat. A conductor's hat, vintage style, slightly crushed on one side. And beside it, a pocket watch. I stopped, staring at these objects that shouldn't be here. My hand moved of its own accord, reaching for the watch. It was heavy, made of tarnished brass with intricate engravings around its edge. The same symbols I'd seen on that wooden door deep below. I shouldn't open it. I knew I shouldn't open it. The watch cover clicked open at my touch. Inside, where the clock face should be, was only darkness, a swirling void that seemed to pull at my vision, at my consciousness. And from that darkness came a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. Wrong choice, Dimitri. You're still on the train. The station lights flickered and went out. When the lights came back on a second later, I was still standing on the platform, the pocket watch clutched in my trembling hand. But something had changed. The station looked. Faded somehow, colors less vibrant, edges less defined. Like a photograph left too long in the sun. I snapped the watch closed and shoved it into my pocket, heart racing. The bench where I'd found it was empty now, no conductor's hat, no sign that anything unusual had ever been there. The station clock read 5:50. 5 minutes had passed in what felt like an instant. The morning shift would arrive soon. I just needed to hold on a little longer. I hurried to the security booth, desperate for the comfort of its enclosed space, its connection to the normal world. Inside, I collapsed into the chair, breath coming in ragged gasps. The monitors showed empty platforms, vacant stairwells. No ghost passengers. No phantom trains. Just an ordinary subway station in the early morning hours. I reached for the logbook, needing to document something, anything, to convince myself that I was back in reality. But as I opened it to today's date, I froze. The page was already filled with writing. My writing. An entry timestamped 5:30 a.m., night shift completed without incident. All areas secure. No unauthorized entry. I hadn't written this. I hadn't done the final security check. I hadn't. A cold certainty settled over me. I wasn't back. Not really. The radio on the desk crackled to life. Central to Pershing Station. Shift change approaching. Acknowledge I should answer. It was protocol. I reached for the radio, but my hand passed through it as if it were smoke. I tried again with the same result. The radio remained solid to my eyes, but insubstantial to my touch. Central to Pershing Station. Please acknowledge, the voice was growing impatient. A shape moved at the edge of my vision, a figure approaching the booth from the platform. Through the glass I recognized Victor, the morning shift guard. He looked tired, sipping from a travel mug of coffee, completely unaware of my presence as he opened the booth door. And walked right through me. I felt nothing, no pressure, no cold sensation like in the ghost stories. He simply passed through the space I occupied as if I weren't there at all. Victor settled into the chair I was sitting in, or thought I was sitting in, and picked up the radio. Pershing acknowledging. Morning shift has arrived. I stumbled backward, passing through the glass wall of the booth without resistance. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Victor, I shouted. I'm right here. Look at me. He gave no indication that he heard, methodically checking the monitors and making notes in the logbook. Panic rose in my throat. I tried to grab the desk, the chair, anything solid, but my hands passed through everything. I wasn't here. I wasn't anywhere. The pocket watch in my pocket suddenly felt heavy, the only thing that still seemed real. I pulled it out, holding it in my palm. Its brass surface gleamed in the fluorescent light, the only object that hadn't faded like the rest of the world. As if sensing my attention, the cover sprang open. The darkness inside seemed to pulse, to breathe. And from within it came the conductor's voice again, clearer now. Time to board, Dmitri. Your seat is waiting. The station around me began to blur, colors running together like wet paint. The walls, the floor, even Victor and the security booth, all melting into a swirling chaos of shape and color. Only the tracks remained solid, stretching out before me into a darkness that grew deeper by the second. And from that darkness came the now familiar rumble of an approaching train. I tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The station had dissolved around me, leaving only the platform edge and those gleaming tracks below. The phantom train burst from the darkness, exactly as before, ancient, damaged, windows full of distorted faces. It screeched to a halt before me, doors sliding open with that terrible hiss. The conductor stood in the doorway, not the melting figure from before, but a sharp, clear image of a man in a pristine uniform, face handsome and ageless. He looked like an idealized version of myself if I had lived a different life. "Last call," he said, extending a gloved hand. "All aboard, I don't want to go," I whispered, though I knew it was futile. "This isn't right," the conductor smiled, not unkindly. "No one ever wants to go, Dmitri. But everyone takes this train eventually. Some just board earlier than scheduled." Behind him, the carriage was no longer filled with the nightmarish passengers I'd seen before. It was empty, seats clean and inviting. The horror had been replaced with an almost peaceful atmosphere, the quiet of a journey's end. "What happened to the others?" I asked. "The passengers from 1978. They've reached their destination," the conductor replied. "As will you. As will everyone." I looked down at the pocket watch in my hand. The swirling darkness had resolved into a clock face, hands pointing to 12. Midnight. It was always midnight on this train. "If I board," I said, finding an unexpected calm in the face of inevitability, "what happens to me?" "The real me, I mean," the conductor's expression softened. "There is no real you separate from what stands before me now, Dmitri. But if it helps you to think of it that way," he gestured toward the dissolving world behind me, "they'll find your body in the security booth tomorrow morning. Heart failure, they'll say. A tragic but natural death. In this," I held up the watch. "Will someone else find this? Will it happen again? It always happens again," the conductor said. "The watch, the station, the train, they're constants. Only the passengers change." I closed the watch with a decisive click. "Then I'm taking this with me." For the first time, the conductor looked surprised. "That's not how this works. The watch must remain for the next passenger." "No," I closed my fist around it. "If I'm boarding this train, the watch comes with me. Break the cycle, even if just once." The conductor's perfect face flickered, revealing something ancient and terrible beneath. "You don't understand what you're doing." "Maybe not," I admitted. "But I'm doing it anyway." I stepped forward, one hand extended toward him, the other clutching the watch tightly. For a moment, neither of us moved, a tableau frozen in the doorway between worlds. Then slowly, the conductor withdrew his own hand. "Very well," he said, his voice tinged with something that might have been respect. "Board with your token. We shall see what happens." I took a deep breath and stepped onto the train. The doors closed behind me with finality. The conductor was gone, the carriage empty except for me. The train began to move, gathering speed as it plunged into the tunnel. Through the windows, I saw not darkness but glimpses of other places, other stations, other times. Faces pressed against the glass from the outside, watching me pass with expressions ranging from envy to pity to rage. I sank into a seat, the pocket watch warm in my hand. I didn't know where this train was taking me, what awaited at the end of the line. But I had made a choice, perhaps the only real choice I'd been given. As the phantom stations blurred past with increasing speed, I opened the watch one last time. The hands were spinning wildly now, moving backward and forward, counting time that had no meaning anymore. In the reflection on the inside of the cover, I saw my own face, but changed. My eyes had the same vertical pupils as the old man in the station below. How long had they been that way? Had I ever truly been human, or had I always been destined for this journey? The question faded as the train hurtled deeper into the void between stations, carrying me toward whatever waited at the final stop. Behind me, in a world growing more distant by the second, the early morning shift at Pershing Station continued. The first regular trains would arrive soon, carrying passengers who would never know how thin the barrier was between their world and mine, never hear the whispers that echoed in empty stations, never see the shadows that moved when no one was watching. But somewhere in that world, the cycle was broken. The pocket watch was gone, traveling with me into the void. What would happen now? Would another token take its place? Or had I created a tiny tear in the fabric of this eternal pattern? I would never know the answer. The train was slowing now, approaching a platform I couldn't quite see through the windows. My destination. The conductor's voice came over the speaker, distorted but clear enough to understand. Final stop. All change. All change, the doors slid open. Beyond them was light, not darkness, not the swirling void, but pure white light that seemed to call to me. I stepped through, still clutching the watch, and the doors closed behind me for the last time. They found my body the next morning, slumped over the desk in the security booth at Pershing Station. Heart failure, they said. A tragic but natural death. Victor, the morning guard who discovered me, gave his statement to the police. He mentioned that I looked peaceful, almost as if I'd fallen asleep. He didn't mention the faint smile on my lips, or the way my hand was curled as if holding something that wasn't there. Pershing Station was demolished the following month as scheduled. During the excavation, workers uncovered an older structure deep beneath the platforms, tunnels and chambers that predated the city itself. The discovery delayed construction for years as archaeologists argued over its origin and purpose. No one could explain the perfect circular tunnels that led away from the central chamber, or the stone bench where they found carvings that matched no known language. And no one could identify the strange brass key uncovered beneath that bench, a key that looked like it might open a pocket watch, though no corresponding watch was ever found. Sometimes, late at night in the stations that replaced Pershing, passengers waiting for the last train home report hearing whispers from empty tunnels, glimpsing figures that vanish when looked at directly. Maintenance workers tell stories of finding wet footprints on platforms that should be empty, of hearing children crying in abandoned corridors. And occasionally, someone will report seeing a man in an old-fashioned security uniform, watching the tracks with patient, vertical-pupiled eyes, waiting for his train to arrive once more. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like, but if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. Who whispers in an empty house? The question hung in my mind as I stood in the doorway of the old cottage, my breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. I had inherited this place from my grandmother, Olna, though I'd never expected to return to it. The wooden beams creaked under the weight of decades, and the smell of pine and something else, something older, filled my nostrils. I'm Mykola Kovalenko, 32 years old, recently divorced and desperate for somewhere to hide from the world for a while. This remote cottage in the Carpathian Mountains seemed perfect. No neighbors for kilometers, just me and the snow-covered pines. Perfect isolation. As I dragged my suitcase across the threshold, the floorboards groaned beneath my feet. I tried to convince myself it was just the old wood adjusting to weight after so many months of emptiness. But there was something in that sound, a reluctance, as if the house itself was sighing at my presence. I shivered, but not from the cold. Though the temperature inside wasn't much warmer than outside, despite the fireplace having been lit by the caretaker earlier that day. I couldn't escape the sensation that the cottage wasn't empty at all. "Hello," I called out, instantly feeling foolish. Who would be here? The caretaker had left hours ago. No response came, yet the silence felt attentive. I moved deeper into the main room, running my fingers along the weathered furniture. Grandmother's old rocking chair sat by the fireplace, a knitted blanket draped across it. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw it moving slightly, as if someone had just gotten up. The windows were frosted over, not unusual given the punishing January cold outside. But as I approached one to look out at the darkening forest, I noticed something strange. Among the natural ice patterns were what looked like finger trails, as if someone had traced shapes from the inside. I followed the pattern with my eyes, a spiral, then what appeared to be letters. I leaned closer. Povernovsia. Returned. My stomach tightened. It was probably the caretaker, leaving me some kind of message. But why in such a cryptic way? And why not mention it when he handed me the keys? I unpacked my few belongings, trying to ignore the persistent feeling of being watched. Old houses make noises, I reminded myself. They settle, they creak, they remember. That night I built up the fire and settled into my grandmother's chair with a glass of horilka to warm my insides. The wind picked up outside, whistling through the eaves like a distant melody. I found myself humming along without realizing it, an old lullaby grandmother used to sing. The flames danced in the fireplace, casting long shadows across the wooden walls. One shadow in particular seemed wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, too still among the moving silhouettes. I blinked and it was gone. Sleep came fitfully that night. The bed was cold despite 3 blankets, and the darkness seemed to press in from all sides. I dreamed of ice, of being trapped beneath a frozen lake, looking up at distorted figures above who wouldn't help me. I woke gasping for breath, my skin clammy despite the chill. The bedroom window was covered in frost, thicker than it had been earlier. And in the pale moonlight streaming through, I could see that the frost had formed a perfect handprint, significantly smaller than my own, pressed against the glass from the outside. But my bedroom was on the 2nd floor. I lay perfectly still, listening to the sounds of the house. The creak of wood, the whisper of wind, and something else. A soft scraping like fingernails on glass, moving slowly down the hallway outside my room. "It's just the branches against the roof," I whispered to myself, but I didn't believe it. The scraping stopped outside my door. A long pause followed, during which I didn't dare breathe. Then came a sound that turned my blood to ice, a gentle knock 3 times in succession. Knock, knock, knock. "Who's there?" I managed to say, my voice cracking. No answer came, but the temperature in the room plummeted so rapidly that I could see my next breath hanging in the air. Knock, 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 louder this time. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating swirling dust motes and something else. A faint mist seeping under the door, curling and twisting like living frost. The door handle began to turn, slowly, deliberately. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The door swung open into darkness. There was nothing there, no person, no monster, just the dark hallway. But as I stared, heart hammering in my chest, the darkness seemed to deepen in one spot, taking on a vaguely human shape. And within that deeper darkness, two pale blue points of light appeared, eyes watching me with ancient patience. "Grandmother," I whispered, though I knew it couldn't be her. Grandmother had been dead for over 15 years. The shape didn't respond, but the temperature dropped even further. The glass of water by my bed froze, solid with a sharp crack. I clutched the blankets closer, unable to look away from those pale blue eyes. They held me transfixed, and in their depths I saw recognition. Whatever this was, it knew me. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the shape dissipated, the darkness returning to normal, empty darkness. But the cold remained, and so did the certainty that I was not alone in this house. As dawn finally broke, I found the courage to get out of bed. My feet hit the wooden floor, and I immediately jerked them back up. The boards were covered in a thin layer of frost, with what looked like barefoot prints leading from the door to my bedside. Small prints like those of a woman or child. And written in the frost on my bedroom mirror in delicate, flowing script were the words that would haunt me for days to come. "Welcome home, little one. I've been waiting so long for you." This question echoed in my mind as I moved through the cottage the next morning, my body tense and alert. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Every shadow seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. I'd convinced myself that last night had been a combination of exhaustion, unfamiliar surroundings, and perhaps a touch too much Horoka. The human mind plays tricks when placed in isolation. That's all it was. Well, it had to be. The morning light filtered weakly through the frosted windows, casting the main room in a pale, bluish glow. I made coffee on the old stove, the familiar ritual bringing some comfort. As I waited for the water to boil, I studied the windows more carefully. The strange finger trails I'd noticed yesterday were gone, replaced by natural frost patterns. Beautiful crystalline structures that spread across the glass like ferns. Except, my eyes narrowed as I approached the largest window. Within the frost patterns there appeared to be a face, the suggestion of eyes, a nose, a mouth frozen in a silent scream. I blinked hard, and the image dissolved back into random patterns. "Get it together, my Cola," I muttered to myself. "You're seeing things," the coffee pot whistled, startling me so badly I knocked a cup to the floor. It shattered, the pieces skittering across the wooden boards. As I bent to clean up the mess, I noticed something odd. The pieces weren't spreading outward as they should have. Instead, they were arranging themselves in a pattern, a crude circle with lines radiating outward like a child's drawing of the sun. I backed away, heart pounding. This wasn't possible. The temperature in the room suddenly dropped, my breath visible in front of me. From somewhere deep within the walls came a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone gently knocking from the inside. Dabbed up, dabbed up, dabbed up. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and frightened even to my own ears. "Is someone there?" The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was worse, somehow expectant, like a held breath. I spent the rest of the morning searching the cottage, looking for rational explanations. Perhaps there were mice in the walls. Maybe the extreme cold was causing the wood to contract in unusual ways. I checked for drafts, for leaking pipes, for anything that might explain the strange phenomena. In the small room that had once been my grandmother's bedroom, now converted to storage, I found a chest filled with old photographs and letters. Most were in Ukrainian, a few in Polish. My own language skills were rusty, a casualty of years spent abroad, but I could make out enough. One photograph caught my attention, my grandmother as a young woman standing in front of this very cottage. She wasn't smiling. Next to her stood another woman, slightly shorter, with long dark hair and startlingly pale eyes. They were holding hands, but there was tension in their posture, as if one was trying to pull away. I turned the photograph over. On the back in faded ink, Olner and Maria, 1953. Maria. The name triggered a distant memory, my grandmother mentioning a sister. A friend. I couldn't recall the details, only that there had been some kind of falling out. As I set the photograph down, the air around me stirred, carrying with it the faint scent of wildflowers, out of place in this winterlocked cottage. The smell was familiar somehow, triggering memories I couldn't quite grasp. Maria, I said the name aloud, testing it. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. I spent the afternoon going through more of the old chest's contents. Letters revealed fragments of a story. My grandmother and this Maria had grown up together, inseparable despite not being blood relatives. There were references to the old ways and keeping the balance. One letter, its edges worn with frequent handling, contained a single line that made my skin crawl. What we did to her cannot be undone, but it must never be spoken of. As daylight began to fade, I realized I'd spent hours poring over the past. The cottage had grown darker, colder. I moved to turn on more lights and build up the fire, but as I stood, something caught my eye, a reflection in the window. A woman stood behind me, her dark hair flowing as if underwater, her skin so pale it was almost blue. Her eyes, the same pale blue I'd seen in the darkness last night, held mine in the reflection. I spun around, my heart nearly stopping. The room was empty, but the coldness intensified, centering around me like an embrace. The papers in my hand frosted over, the ink bleeding as ice crystals formed on the surface. "What do you want?" I whispered, my words visible in the frigid air. No answer came, but the frost on the window began to move, forming letters. You know what was stolen. I backed away, bumping into the old chest. Something clattered to the floor, a small, carved wooden box I hadn't noticed before. It had no lock, but was bound with a faded red ribbon tied in an intricate knot. As I bent to pick it up, the temperature plummeted further. Ice began to form on my eyelashes, my fingers growing numb. The wooden box felt unnaturally heavy in my hands, and cold, so cold it burned. "I don't know what was stolen," I said to the empty room. "I don't know what you want from me." The lights flickered again, more violently this time, before extinguishing completely. In the sudden darkness, I could hear my own panicked breathing and something else, a soft, rhythmic sound. Like someone humming a lullaby. The same lullaby my grandmother used to sing. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating swirling motes of frost in the air, and beyond them, a figure standing in the doorway. It was the woman from the reflection, but more solid now. She wore a simple white dress that seemed to move with an unfelt breeze. Her bare feet didn't quite touch the floor. And her eyes, those pale blue eyes, they weren't angry. They were sorrowful. "Maria," I whispered. She nodded, a slight movement, before raising one pale hand to point at the wooden box I held. "What is this? What does it mean?" Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Instead, the ice on the windows began to crack, forming a web of fractures that spelled out, "Open it." My fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the ribbon. After several attempts, the knot came loose. The ribbon fell away, curling on the floor like a crimson snake. I hesitated, my instincts screaming that opening the box would change everything. But Maria's presence was insistent, her gaze unrelenting. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried flowers, lay a single braid of dark hair tied with a faded blue ribbon, and beside it, a small, tarnished silver ring set with a pale blue stone. As I stared at the contents, uncomprehending, the temperature dropped so rapidly that the wooden box frosted over in my hands. The braid inside stiffened, the dried flowers crumbling to dust. Maria's form flickered like a candle flame in wind. Her sorrow seemed to fill the room, pressing against me like a physical force. The humming grew louder, the lullaby distorting into something mournful, desperate. And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the dark with a box of frozen memories and the certainty that the cottage held secrets my grandmother had taken to her grave. Secrets that Maria had not forgotten. As I stood there, shivering in the unnatural cold, the lights suddenly came back on, so bright they hurt my eyes. The temperature began to normalize, the frost receding from the windows, from the floor, from everywhere except the small wooden box in my hands. That night I slept with the box beside my bed, unable to let it out of my sight. In my dreams, I saw two young women dancing in summer fields, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. I saw their hands intertwined, saw the silver ring gleaming on one slender finger. I saw love and then betrayal and then something worse, a ritual in the dead of winter, my grandmother's face hard with resolve as Maria screamed, her body slowly encased in ice that formed from the inside out. I woke gasping, the room around me crystalline with frost, the braid and ring from the box now lying on my chest, ice gold against my skin. And written in the frost on the ceiling above my bed, she took my love. She took my life. She took my warmth. Now I take yours. The question tormented me as I paced the cottage the following day, the wooden box clutched in my hands like a talisman. Sleep had evaded me after that midnight message, my mind racing with implications I couldn't or wouldn't fully comprehend. Outside, a blizzard had blown in overnight. Snow piled against the windows, sealing me inside with whatever presence haunted these walls. I tried the phone, no signal. The internet connection was similarly dead. I was cut off, alone with Maria and the secrets that bound us. The cottage felt different now, transformed. Corners I had never noticed before seemed to bend at impossible angles. Shadows lingered where no shadows should be. And always, always there was the cold, a piercing, unnatural chill that no fire could dispel. I placed the wooden box on the kitchen table, staring at its contents. The braid of dark hair. The silver ring with its pale blue stone. Tokens of a life cut short. Tokens of my grandmother's guilt. I don't understand, I said aloud, my voice sounding hollow in the quiet house. What happened between you and my grandmother? What did she take from you? The lights flickered in response, the refrigerator humming to life, then dying again. From somewhere upstairs came a soft thump, like footsteps on carpet. I followed the sound, climbing the narrow staircase, each step groaning beneath my weight. The second floor was colder than the first, my breath forming dense clouds before me. The footsteps led to a small door at the end of the hallway, the attic access that I had noticed but ignored during my initial exploration. It was ajar now, a sliver of darkness beckoning. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, to leave the cottage altogether and never return. But deeper than fear was curiosity, and perhaps responsibility. Whatever wrong had been done, it had been done by my blood. I pushed the door open wider. A wooden ladder extended upward into darkness. With trembling hands, I took out my phone and activated the flashlight before climbing up. The attic was surprisingly large, the ceiling following the steep pitch of the roof. Dust motes danced in the beam of my light, swirling unnaturally, almost purposefully. Old furniture lay beneath sheets, their shapes suggestive of crouching figures. Trunks and boxes lined the walls, decades of memories stored away and forgotten. But it was the center of the attic that drew my attention. A perfect circle had been cleared in the dust, and within it lay a pattern of small objects, dried flowers, smooth stones, bits of bone, arranged in a complex design I somehow recognized from my dream. A ritual circle. As I approached, the temperature plummeted. My phone's light dimmed, flickered, died, then came back on, weaker but sufficient to show me what lay at the circle's center. A small, ancient-looking book bound in cracked leather, its pages yellow with age. I knelt beside it, my fingers hovering over the cover. Some primal instinct warned me not to touch it, but I had come too far to turn back now. The moment my skin made contact, a jolt of cold so intense it burned shot up my arm. The book fell open, its pages flipping rapidly as if caught in a wind I couldn't feel, before settling on a handwritten entry dated December 21st, 1953. My grandmother's handwriting. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. It is done. Maria's power is contained. The binding worked, though the cost was higher than I expected. The ice took her completely. Her last words haunt me, that someday someone of my blood would return, and she would reclaim what was stolen. I have secured the tokens in the chest. They must never be disturbed, or the binding will weaken. I sat back on my heels, the implications washing over me. My grandmother had been some kind of practitioner, of what I wasn't sure, but the ritual circle and the reference to binding and power suggested something beyond normal understanding. And Maria. Whatever she had been, my grandmother had feared her enough to imprison her somehow. In ice. As I struggled to make sense of it all, a soft scraping sound behind me made me turn. There, at the edge of the ritual circle, stood Maria, more solid than I had seen her before, though still translucent around the edges. Her eyes, those pale blue orbs that had haunted me since my arrival, now held a mixture of sorrow and something darker. Anger. Betrayal. I don't understand, I said again, my voice barely a whisper. What did she take from you? Maria's form flickered, and suddenly the attic around me transformed. The dust and cobwebs vanished, the furniture emerged from beneath its covers, and light streamed through a window that had been boarded up in my time. Two young women sat by that window, my grandmother, recognizable from photos though decades younger, and Maria, vibrant with life, her pale eyes sparkling as she laughed. They were working on something together, their heads bent close, fingers intertwined when they weren't needed for their task. The intimacy between them was unmistakable. They were more than friends. The scene shifted. The same women, now in a forest clearing under a full moon. They stood within a circle similar to the one in the attic, hands raised as they chanted words in a language I didn't recognize. The air around them shimmered with power, with possibility. Another shift. Tension now. My grandmother arguing with an older woman, her mother perhaps. Maria watching from the doorway, her expression fearful. Words I couldn't hear, but whose meaning was clear from the gestures, the expressions. Disapproval. Ultimatums. Choices being forced. A final scene the most terrible. Winter. The cottage, its windows frosted over. My grandmother inside the ritual circle, but alone this time, her face set in determination as she worked a spell, unlike the joyful magic she had shared with Maria. And outside, pounding on the door, Maria's voice carrying faintly, "Olna, please." "We can find another way," my grandmother's voice hard with resolve. "There is no other way. I must do what is expected of me. I cannot be what you want me to be," the door bursting open. Maria rushing in, frost forming around her feet with each step, her power manifesting in her distress. My grandmother completing the spell, throwing something into the flames, a handful of dark hair, a silver ring. The effect was immediate and horrific. Ice crystals formed on Maria's skin, spreading rapidly, her scream cut short as frost filled her throat, her lungs. Her eyes, those pale blue eyes, wide with shock, with betrayal, with a love turning to hatred as her body became a statue of ice. My grandmother's whisper, "Forgive me." The vision faded, leaving me once more in the dusty, cold attic, Maria's spirit regarding me with the same eyes that had frozen over in my vision. "She bound your power," I whispered, understanding at last. "She trapped you in ice because she was afraid to love you." Maria nodded, a single tear tracking down her translucent cheek, freezing before it could fall. I looked down at the book still open in my lap, then back at the ghost of the woman my grandmother had sacrificed for conformity, for acceptance, for the life she thought she should have instead of the one she wanted. "I'm sorry," I said, the words inadequate but all I had. "I'm so sorry for what she did to you." Maria's form flickered again, her outline becoming sharper, more defined. She extended one pale hand toward me, her expression changing from sorrow to urgency. Without thinking, I reached out to take it. Her touch was like plunging my hand into a frozen lake. Cold beyond imagining shot through my body, dropping me to my knees. My vision blurred, darkened at the edges. Through the haze of pain, I saw frost creeping up my arm from where her fingers touched mine. I tried to pull away, but her grip was unrelenting. The cold spread, reaching my shoulder, my chest. Ice crystals formed on my eyelashes, in my beard. "Please," I gasped. "I'm not hurt. I didn't do this to you." Maria's voice finally came, not through the air but directly into my mind, each word sharp as an icicle. Blood calls to blood. Debt demands payment. Her oath is bound to her line. What oath, I managed to ask as the cold reached my heart, each beat becoming slower, more labored. To return what was stolen when one of her blood came home. The ring, the hair. Take them, they're yours. Maria's grip tightened, frost now covering my entire left side. Not those tokens. Those were just the keys to my prison. She took my heart, my future, my choice. So she must give them back. Understanding dawned even as consciousness began to slip away. My grandmother hadn't just bound Maria's power. She had bound her love, her life force, her very essence. And according to whatever magical laws governed this exchange, only someone of Olna's blood could restore what was taken. Only I could set Maria free. But the price would be my own life, frozen from the inside out just as she had been. As darkness closed in, as the ice reached my other arm, my legs, I had a choice to make, one that would determine whether Maria's vengeful spirit would continue to haunt this cottage, waiting for the next descendant of Olna Kovalenko, or whether decades of suffering would finally end. In that moment, hovering between life and death, I saw my grandmother's face again, not as the cold, determined woman from the vision, but as I remembered her in my childhood. Kind, sad, a woman who carried the weight of a terrible choice her entire life. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Maria's face, her expression softening as she recognized the decision in my eyes. Thank you, came her voice, gentle now, for ending the winter. And then there was only ice. I was floating in darkness, surrounded by cold so profound it had moved beyond pain into a kind of numbing peace. I couldn't feel my body anymore. Couldn't remember why I should care. Images drifted through the void. My grandmother as a young woman, her face twisted with regret as ice claimed Maria. My parents, distant figures who had never understood why grandmother insisted I visit the cottage each summer. My own life, a series of half-lived moments, always haunted by a melancholy I couldn't name. And through it all, a lullaby played, the melody distorted, slowed, as if sung underwater. Wake up, the voice cut through the darkness, unfamiliar yet insistent. Not Maria's voice. Wake you, P. Miacola. You must wake up now. With tremendous effort, I forced my eyes open. I was still in the attic, lying on my back within the ritual circle. Every inch of my body was covered in a thin layer of frost, except for my face. Standing over me was a woman I had never seen before, elderly, with sharp features and bright, alert eyes. Whom my lips barely moved, cracking with frost. No time, the woman snapped. She knelt beside me, her gnarled hands hovering over my chest. The binding is nearly complete. If you surrender now, both you and Maria will be lost. She began to chant in the same language I had heard in the vision, her fingers tracing patterns in the air that seemed to shimmer with a faint blue light. As she worked, warmth began to seep back into my extremities, painful and burning. I don't understand, I managed, my voice stronger now. Who are you? The woman's eyes flicked to mine briefly. Katerina. I was your grandmother's teacher before she turned from our ways. You're a... Which, the word felt ridiculous on my tongue. Katerina made a dismissive noise. Such a primitive term. We are keepers of balance, guardians of the old knowledge. Or we're supposed to be, her expression darkened. What Olna did to Maria violated every principle we uphold. Using our craft for personal gain, for harm, she shook her head. I've been trying to undo it for decades, but the binding was too strong. Until you came, the warmth had reached my chest now, my heartbeat growing stronger, more regular. I could move my fingers, my toes. Why me? What did I do? Blood calls to blood, Katerina said, echoing Maria's words. The binding was tied to Olna's lineage. Only someone of her blood could break it, by choice or by force. I struggled to sit up, frost falling from my clothes in crystalline sheets. Maria was going to kill me, not kill, Katerina corrected. Replace. The binding requires an exchange, a life for a life, a prison for a prison. If you had surrendered completely, your body would have become her vessel, and your spirit would have taken her place in the ice. I shuddered, remembering the cold that had claimed me, the darkness that had beckoned. Why stop it then? Isn't that what you want? To free Maria, Katerina's hands stilled, her expression softening with something like pity. Not like this. Vengeance is not our way. What Olna did was wrong, but replacing one injustice with another solves nothing. She resumed her chanting, the blue light growing stronger around her fingers. Besides, you made a choice in that moment, to offer yourself willingly, out of compassion, not surrender under coercion. That changes everything. As Katerina worked, the attic around us began to change. Frost retreated from the walls, from the floor. The air grew warmer, easier to breathe. And at the edge of the ritual circle, Maria's form appeared again, but different now, less substantial, her edges blurring into mist. Her expression was no longer angry, but confused, almost afraid. What's happening to her? I asked. The binding is weakening, Katerina explained. But it's not yet broken. For that we need the tokens and a willing sacrifice. I have them, I said, struggling to my feet. My limbs felt wooden, distant, but functional. The ring and the braid. They're downstairs, Katerina nodded. Go, bring them. Hurry, I can't hold the balance much longer. I descended the ladder, moving as quickly as my half-frozen body would allow. The cottage felt different now, lighter, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. In the kitchen, the wooden box still sat on the table where I had left it. As I reached for it, the temperature around me plummeted again. Frost raced across the table, the floor, the walls. Maria's form coalesced before me, more solid than I had seen her yet, her pale eyes wide with desperation. Don't, her voice whispered in my mind. Let me in. Let me live again. At the cost of my life, I asked, my hand hovering over the box. You offered already. I felt it. You were willing. Out of guilt. Out of pity. Not understanding the full price, does that matter? Blood demands blood. It is the way. I studied her face, beautiful even in death, even in this half-existence. I could see why my grandmother had loved her. Could see, too, the person she must have been before betrayal hardened her heart. There has to be another way, I said. One that doesn't require more suffering. Maria's form flickered, her expression torn between longing and rage. There is no other way. What was taken must be returned. Then I'll return it, I said, picking up the box. But not through revenge. Not through more binding and imprisonment. Katerina says there's another path. At the mention of the older woman's name, Maria's form trembled. Katerina lives. After all this time, she's upstairs. She says she's been trying to free you for decades. Indecision crossed Maria's features, a battle between the vengeful spirit she had become and the woman she had once been. Finally she nodded, her form becoming less solid, more mist-like again. I will listen, but the debt remains. I returned to the attic, the wooden box clutched in my hands. Katerina was still kneeling within the ritual circle, blue light flowing from her fingers to form a dome over the area. She looked up as I entered, her face drawn with exhaustion. You found them. Good, she gestured for me to join her. And I see Maria has decided to be reasonable. Maria's form appeared at the edge of the circle, wavering like heat haze. She regarded Katerina with a mixture of wariness and hope. What now? I asked, opening the box to reveal the silver ring and the braid of dark hair. Now we complete what Olna began, but properly, with respect for the balance. Katerina held out her hand. The tokens, please. I placed them in her palm. She closed her fingers around them, her eyes shutting as she murmured words too low for me to catch. The blue light intensified, washing over the three of us in waves. The binding Olna created was fundamentally flawed, Katerina explained, her eyes still closed. She sought to separate what cannot be separated, love from power, choice from consequence. In doing so, she fractured the natural order. The ritual circle began to glow, the pattern of objects illuminated from within. Maria's form grew more distinct within the blue light, her features sharpening. To restore balance, we must acknowledge the truth Olna denied, Katerina continued. That love and power are two faces of the same force. That choices once made cannot be unmade, only atoned for. She opened her eyes, fixing me with a penetrating gaze. Mykola Kovalenko, blood of Olna's blood, are you willing to offer atonement for her actions? I hesitated, uncertain what was being asked of me. What kind of atonement, not your life, Katerina assured me. But something nearly as precious, your connection to this place, to this lineage. The power that flows in your veins, dormant but real. I blinked, startled. I have power, all humans do, to some degree. In your family, it runs stronger than most. How do you think you've survived Maria's cold for this long? Why do you think you could see her when others before you could not? Katerina's voice softened. The gift skipped a generation with your parents, but in you, it merely slumbers. I looked at my hands, remembering how the frost had crept up them, how I had somehow resisted longer than I should have. And you want me to give this up? My magic, not just give it up, Katerina corrected. Transfer it to Maria. To restore what Olna took, I looked at Maria's ghostly form, understanding dawning. The power my grandmother bound. It's still here. Inside me, Katerina nodded. Not all of it. Most remained with Maria, imprisoning her even as it was imprisoned. But the spark, the essence that Olna took into herself, and it passed to you through blood, and if I give it back, what happens to Maria? She will be free. Not alive again, that is beyond even our power, but free to move on, to find peace. Katerina's gaze shifted to Maria. No more haunting. No more cold. No more waiting for vengeance that can never truly satisfy. Maria's form trembled, her eyes fixing on mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. Is this true? Her voice whispered in my mind. Can I finally rest? Katerina nodded. It is true, but only if the gift is given freely, not taken. Only if my Kola chooses to break the cycle Olna began. I looked between them, the elderly woman who had dedicated decades to undoing my grandmother's mistake and the ghost of the woman who had suffered because of it. The choice seemed obvious. I'll do it, I said. Tell me what to do. Katerina placed the silver ring and the braid in the center of the ritual circle. Kneel across from me. Place your hands on the tokens. I did as instructed, the chill from the floor seeping through my already cold knees. The moment my fingers touched the ring and braid, a jolt went through me, not pain, but a strange resonance, as if something inside me recognized something in them. Now close your eyes, Katerina instructed. Picture the power within you, a light, perhaps, or a flame. See it clearly. I shut my eyes, focusing inward. At first, there was only darkness. Then gradually I became aware of a warmth at my core, a faint glow that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Barely there, but undeniably present. I see it, I murmured. Good. Now imagine that light flowing out through your hands into the tokens. Freely given. A gift, not a sacrifice. I concentrated on the image, visualizing the glow traveling down my arms, through my fingers, into the ring and braid. It was surprisingly easy, as if the power wanted to return to its rightful owner. As the light left me, I felt a curious emptiness, not painful but noticeable. A space within that I hadn't known was filled until it wasn't. Katerina's voice seemed to come from very far away. Maria, come into the circle. Reclaim what is yours. Through my closed eyelids, I sensed a brightness growing. A warmth pushing back against the cold that had permeated the cottage since my arrival. A presence moving closer. I opened my eyes. Maria stood within the circle, her form solid now, though still translucent. The blue light from Katerina's spell swirled around her, through her, illuminating her from within. Her eyes, those pale blue eyes that had haunted me, were fixed on the tokens beneath my hands, her expression hungry, hopeful. Slowly I removed my hands from the ring and braid. They began to rise into the air, suspended in the blue light, spinning slowly. The braid unwound, individual hairs separating, dancing like dark flames. The ring's stone glowed brighter and brighter, until it was painful to look at directly. Maria reached out, her transparent fingers closing around the floating objects. The moment she touched them, a blinding flash filled the attic. I threw my arm across my eyes, dazzled. When I could see again, the ritual circle was dark. The tokens were gone. Katerina slumped forward, exhausted but smiling faintly. And Maria stood before me, changed. Still transparent, still not quite of this world, but different. The cold that had surrounded her was gone. Her form no longer flickered, but remained steady, clear. And her expression, the anger, the vengeance that had hardened her features, was replaced by something softer. Sadness, yes, but also peace. Thank you, her voice came, stronger now, no longer a whisper, but a clear tone in my mind. Forgiving freely what she took by force. What is it? Is it enough? I asked, looking to Katerina. Is she free now? The older woman nodded, pushing herself to her feet with visible effort. The binding is broken. The balance restored. She looked at Maria with something like pride. You can go now, child. Whatever lies beyond is open to you. Maria's form began to shimmer, edges softening further. Light seemed to emanate from within her, warm and golden rather than the icy blue of before. Almost, she said. There is one thing more. She turned to me, floating closer until she stood directly before me. Up close, I could see the details of her face more clearly, the curve of her cheek, the shape of her lips, the tiny flecks of darker blue in her pale eyes. Beautiful even in this half-existence. Tell her, Maria said, when you see her beyond. Tell Olna I understand now. And I forgive her. Before I could respond, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to my forehead, a kiss that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long winter. Then she was gone, the golden light expanding outward in a gentle wave that washed over the attic, the cottage, pushing back the last vestiges of unnatural cold. With it came a sense of release, of completion. The air itself seemed to sigh with relief. I turned to Katerina, who was watching the space where Maria had been with tears in her eyes. Is that it? I asked. It's over, Katerina nodded, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. It's over. The debt is paid. The cycle broken, she fixed me with a thoughtful look. How do you feel? I took a moment to assess myself, searching for the emptiness I had felt when the power left me. It was still there, but not as hollow as before. More like a space waiting to be filled with something new. Different, I said finally. Lighter, maybe. But also, incomplete, Katerina smiled, the expression transforming her severe features into something almost maternal. That's natural. You've given up something you barely knew you had. It will take time to adjust. Will I ever? Will the power come back? No. That specific gift is gone forever, returned to its rightful owner. She placed a gnarled hand on my shoulder. But there are many kinds of power in this world, Mykola Kovalenko. Many ways to maintain the balance. If you wish to learn, I could teach you, as I once taught your grandmother. I blinked, surprised by the offer. You'd do that. Even after what happened with her, perhaps because of what happened with her. Katerina's eyes were knowing, ancient. Mistakes are the greatest teachers if we're wise enough to learn from them. As we descended from the attic, the cottage felt transformed. Sunlight streamed through windows that had been frosted over since my arrival. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by the simple quiet of an old house at peace with its history. Outside, the blizzard had stopped. Fresh snow blanketed the landscape, pristine and beautiful rather than threatening. That night I slept soundly for the first time since arriving at the cottage. No knocking disturbed my rest, no frost formed on the windows, no pale blue eyes watched from the darkness. But I dreamed vivid, powerful dreams of two young women dancing in summer fields, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Their hands intertwined, the silver ring gleaming. Love untainted by fear or society's expectations. And in the morning, when I woke, I found a single strand of dark hair on my pillow and knew what my answer to Katerina would be. Spring came early to the mountains that year. March had barely begun when the first crocuses pushed through the melting snow around the cottage, their purple and yellow blooms defiant against the lingering patches of white. I watched them from my grandmother's rocking chair, my rocking chair now, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. 2 months had passed since the night the binding broke. 2 months of learning, of adjustment, of gradual healing, for the cottage and for me. Katerina had been true to her word. 3 times a week she made the journey from her home in the village to teach me what she called the old ways. Not magic, she scoffed at the term, but something older, more fundamental. The art of balance, of seeing the connections between all things, of working with those connections rather than against them. Your grandmother had the gift, she told me one afternoon as we sat by the fire, sorting herbs for drying. One of the strongest I've ever seen. But she lacked understanding. She saw power as a tool for changing the world to suit her desires, not as a responsibility to maintain what should be. Is that why she bound Maria? I asked. Because she wanted to change her own fate. Katerina's hands stilled, her expression thoughtful. Partly, but it was more complicated than that. Olna was afraid of her own failings, of society's judgment, of the intensity of what she shared with Maria. She sighed, the sound heavy with old regrets. And fear is the enemy of wisdom. It makes us do terrible things in the name of safety. I thought often of Maria in those early weeks. Though the cottage was free of her presence, no cold spots, no frost patterns, no whispered lullabies, I felt her absence keenly, as if I had lost someone I had known for years rather than days. Is that normal? I asked Katerina once. To miss someone who tried to kill me. She wasn't trying to kill you, Katerina corrected, her tone patient as always. She was trying to find a way back to life. And what you're feeling isn't about Maria herself, but what she represents, a connection to your past, to your heritage. To the power you've given up. I wasn't entirely convinced, but I didn't argue. The absence of Maria, of the power I'd returned to her, remained a hollow space inside me. Not painful exactly, but noticeable. Like the gap left by a pulled tooth, which the tongue can't help but probe. As spring advanced, I found myself staying on at the cottage, rather than returning to my interrupted life abroad. I called it a sabbatical when friends asked, a chance to reconnect with my roots. The truth was both simpler and more complex. I wasn't sure who I was anymore or where I belonged. The cottage began to feel like home in a way no place had before. I repaired its aging infrastructure, the leaky roof, the creaky stairs, the ancient plumbing. I planted a garden where Katerina assured me my grandmother and Maria had once grown herbs together. I learned the names of the birds that nested in the eaves, the cycles of the moon over the mountains, the rhythm of life in this remote corner of the world. And slowly the hollow space inside me began to fill with something new. Not power, not magic, but a kind of quiet knowing. A sense of my place in the scheme of things. It was a cool evening in early May when everything changed again. I was sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple when I felt a shift in the air, not a chill, but a subtle alteration, as if the fabric of reality had been gently folded. I knew who it was before I turned. Maria stood at the edge of the garden, her form solid yet still translucent, backlit by the setting sun so that she seemed to glow from within. She wore the same simple white dress I remembered, but her bare feet now touched the ground, leaving slight impressions in the soft earth. "You came back," I said, surprised by how calm I felt. No fear, no shock, just a quiet recognition, as if I had been waiting for this moment without realizing it. I never truly left. Her voice came, no longer in my head but in the air around me, soft as a summer breeze. I've been elsewhere, learning what it means to be neither living nor dead. Are you still bound to this place? She shook her head, moving closer, her movements more fluid than I remembered. Not bound, connected. There's a difference. I gestured to the empty chair beside me. To my surprise, she sat, her form maintaining its integrity rather than dispersing as I expected. You've changed the cottage, she observed, looking around at the freshly painted shutters, the newly planted flower beds. It feels lighter. I've been trying to heal it, I said. Like Katerina's been trying to heal me. Maria's smile was gentle, understanding. Some wounds take longer than others. For places, for people, for spirit. We sat in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge, brilliant in the clear mountain air. Why did you come back? I finally asked. I thought you were free. I thought you'd moved on. I have. And I am free. Maria turned those pale blue eyes on me, now filled with a peace I hadn't seen before. But freedom isn't always about leaving. Sometimes it's about choosing to stay on your own terms. I don't understand this place, this land. It was my home too. Before Olna's betrayal, before the binding, I loved it here. Her gaze swept over the garden, the mountains beyond. I still do. And now that I can come and go as I please, I find I want to remain. Connected to the cottage, to you. The words hung between us, simple yet profound. You gave up something precious to free me, she continued. A piece of yourself. A potential future. I've come to offer something in return. You don't owe me anything, I protested. What my grandmother did was not your doing. I know. Maria's smile deepened. This isn't about debt or obligation. It's about choice, about balance. She extended one translucent hand toward me. Take my hand, Mykola Kovalenko, and I'll show you what I mean. I hesitated only briefly before placing my hand in hers. Her touch wasn't cold anymore, but warm, not with human warmth, but with something else. Something older, more elemental. The moment our hands connected, the world around us changed. The night sky seemed to expand, stars multiplying until they surrounded us completely. The boundaries between earth and air, between solid and spirit, blurred and dissolved. And I could see, truly see, for the first time. The connections Katerina had spoken of became visible, threads of light linking all things. The flow of energy through the land, through the cottage, through me. The past and present overlapping, generations of lives leaving their imprint on this place. And most clearly of all, I could see the connection between Maria and myself, a strand of light that pulsed with shared power, shared blood, shared purpose. This is what Olna never understood. Maria's voice came, resonating through the web of light. That true power lies not in binding or controlling, but in connecting. In recognizing that we are all part of the same whole. The vision faded gradually, the world resolving back into ordinary night. but something of it remained, a heightened awareness, a deeper perception. I could still sense the connections, even if I could no longer see them. And I could feel something new inside me, filling the hollow space that had bothered me for months. Not the power I had given up, but something different. Something shared. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice hushed with wonder. "I did nothing. We did this." Maria's form seemed more substantial now, the edges less blurred. "The gift you returned to me, I've shaped a part of it into something we can both access. Not separately, but together." "Where's that?" Aloud. Katerina never mentioned anything like this. Maria's laugh was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Katerina knows much, but not everything. Some magics are older than her teachings. Some connections deeper than her understanding. She rose from the chair, her white dress moving in an unfelt breeze. "I must go for now, but I'll return, and in the meantime explore what we've created. Learn its limits, its possibilities. Will I see you again soon?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, revealing more of my feelings than I intended. Maria's smile was knowing, perhaps even a bit mischievous. "Sooner than you think." The veil between worlds grows thin at certain times and in certain places. She gestured to the cottage, to the land around it. "Here where our stories intersect, it's thinner than most." She began to fade, her form becoming transparent, then translucent, then barely visible at all. "Until next time, Mykola Kovalenko. Blood of Olna's blood. Guardian of this place." And then she was gone, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air where she had stood. But the connection remained, a warm presence inside me where emptiness had been. And with it came knowledge, not complete but growing. Understanding of what we had created between us, of what it might become. That night I dreamed of the future rather than the past. Of seasons changing around the cottage, years passing. Of Katerina's teachings taking root and flowering into something new, something that combined the old ways with modern understanding. Of a place where the veil between worlds remained thin, where connections could be forged across the boundary of life and death. And throughout it all, Maria's presence, sometimes visible, sometimes merely felt, but always there. Not bound, but connected. Not trapped, but returning by choice. When I woke the next morning, frost patterns decorated my bedroom window, despite the warm May air outside. But unlike before, these weren't random or threatening. They formed a clear, deliberate message. Some hauntings are chosen. Some embraces, even cold ones, are welcome. I touched the frost, feeling not ice but warmth beneath my fingertips. And I knew that whatever happened next, whatever I built in this place where past and present, living and dead, pain and healing all intersected, I would not be building it alone. The cottage that had once been a prison had become something else entirely. A junction, a meeting place, a home where winter's edge met spring's promise, and both could exist together in perfect balance. Just as Maria and I now did. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.